Good afternoon, and welcome to Making It Work. My name is Allison McCann, and I am the Vice President of Business Development for the Portland Press Herald and the Masthead Made Media Network. Thank you for joining us for our first Making It Work of 2021. Before I turn things over to Carol and the panel, I'd like to thank our Making It Work sponsors, many of whom have supported our business events year after year. They are Cross Insurance, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Katahdin Trust Company, and MEMIC. We thank them for their continued support, which makes these events possible. And now I will hand things over to the Portland Press Herald's Special Projects Editor, Carol Coultas, to get things started. Carol?
Thank you, Allie. Welcome, everyone. This is our first Making It Work of 2021, and hopefully when we have this meeting again next January, the pandemic will be in our rear window and there will be some semblance of normalcy in Maine's business community and our economy and just the general population at large. It's been an unprecedented year, or at least an unprecedented 10 months. And I am in particular really impressed with the tenacity of businesses and nonprofits that have figured out a way to navigate what's been an unprecedented year of challenges for business operators. So kudos to all of you. We settled on this topic because there's a lot of news right now around minimum wage. And as I'm sure you're aware, the city of Portland passed a referendum in November that raises the minimum wage in the city to $15 an hour by 2024. And part of that referendum also enacted an $18 an hour minimum wage for people who are essential workers during the pandemic. Now that has been challenged in court and the judge presiding on that case expects to issue a decision by the end of the month. He hasn't done that yet, and we just checked this morning. I had the Press Herald court reporter checked in, and no, there has not been a decision. There's a general consensus that no matter how the judge rules, it's likely to then be appealed to the Maine Supreme Judicial Court. So no one's really quite sure where that is right now. Some businesses in Portland have adopted it and others have not. My colleague in the newsroom, Peter McGuire, did a really good story, sort of just bringing everyone up to speed on the impact of that ran in Friday's paper. So I would encourage you to check that out if you haven't done so already. And coincidentally, we have a new president in the White House, and one of his policy initiatives is to raise the federal minimum wage, which has been at $7.25 an hour for, I don't know, maybe decades at this point, to raise that to $15 an hour also by 2024. So there are lots of things sort of in the ether right now around minimum wage. And it made me wonder, how have Maine's small businesses and nonprofits navigated the last minimum wage increase that we've had in the state of Maine, which was the referendum in 2016 that was passed that raised the state minimum wage from what had been $7.50 an hour, raised it incrementally until $12 an hour, which it hit that in last year in 2020. Now, further increases are pegged to cost of living. So right now, the state minimum wage is $12.15 an hour. But it made me wonder if there were strategies and lessons learned from businesses and nonprofits that were able to navigate the last round of minimum wage increases that might be helpful for people as we look at the probability of future minimum wage increases. So to that effect, I invited a small business operator, a nonprofit manager, and a compensation specialist. Let me introduce them to you, and then we're going to get right to our discussion. Just a matter of a format. We're going to talk for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom navigation bar, and we'll take questions when we get to that portion of our segment. So let me introduce our panelists. Since 2010, Suzanne Foley Ferguson has been the owner-operator of Beal's Old Fashioned Ice Cream on Veranda Street in Portland. Until October of last year, she also ran another store in Scarborough and has had as many as 24 employees. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan and volunteers with several conservation organizations and has served 2 terms as a city councilor in Scarborough. Also joining us is Peter Kowalski. He is the recently retired executive director of John F. Murphy Homes, a provider of services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He spent 36 years as the organization's CEO and has really vast experience dealing with the kinds of disruptions that affect a service provider in the nonprofit realm. So he is a graduate of UMaine Orono. He has served as the president of the LA Rotary Club, where he's been a member for 34 years. And he's also been president of a national organization that represents service providers to intellectually disabled communities. And finally, we have Carrie Mayo, a compensation consultant with KMA Human Resources Consulting. Carrie has more than a decade of experience in compensation and data analytics. She's a graduate of Bryant University, and she's developed broad-based compensation background that includes expertise around compensation strategy development, benchmarking, job evaluations, sales compensation, salary structure creation, merit programs, and a whole bunch of other sort of like the rudimentary basic information that you need to have if you're going to employ people and compensate them fairly and competitively. And Carrie has done a lot of volunteer work with the United Way. So welcome to our panelists. And let me get the ball rolling by asking, can you please summarize the impact of the rising minimum wage on your operations? And Peter and Sue, if you can take that first and be as specific as you can with your operational information, that would be super helpful. So Sue, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Oh, Sue, you are muted.
There we go.
Yep, sorry about that.
Okay.
So I guess the first thing to for me is that I'm not sure whether or not it's going to be worth it for me to hang on to my business. And the reason for that is because small business owners like mom and pops, it's more of a lifestyle choice for me. You're not there to make a lot of money. The margins are razor slim to begin with in all restaurant and food industries. And so for me, it was, I was able to be with my daughter, go to her lacrosse games, that sort of thing. But what's happened now is the profit margins are so slim that is it even worth it to hold that job anymore? I mean, so that's one of the things. And if you want specifics, I guess what I would say about payroll, when I first started in 2010, my payroll expenses were in the mid 20s, which I think is typical for restaurants, 20% of my expenses. And now they're sort of heading up to mid 30s, going on 38% last year. And that's really significant. And so, yeah, I guess that would be my summary. It's shifted my focus towards efficiency and that sort of thing.
Okay, all right. And how about you, Peter? What's been the impact on John F. Murphy Homes?
It's been really, well, I don't want to say devastating, but pretty close to that. Well, before the minimum wage went up, we had problems attracting staff. This is not a Maine issue, it's a nationwide issue. There's only so many people that want to be caregivers for people with intellectual disabilities. Well, we're different than other businesses in that we don't set our own price. The state of Maine decides what we're going to be paid, how many hours we're going to deliver, and we're paid by the hour. So we have no room to move. So in the long and the short of it, what we have done over time is, besides consolidating programs, we've shifted our focus. We started as primarily a service providing residential options for folks. And we moved much more into children's services and to day program services and other unrelated business items to try to offset that huge deficit. We have a rate that was set in 2007, has hardly moved since then. So we did not see any increase during the minimum wage. Our rate is a very complex rate based on an hourly wage. Well, in 2007, it was based on an average wage of $10.36, or today it's based on an average wage of $11 an hour, which is way below the minimum wage. Well, $15 minimum wage is going to be very, very difficult to handle. But more the things that we knew coming, but really didn't know how to deal with them and still don't know how to deal with them, or is the massive salary compression. So we have folks that have been there for 15, 20 years now making the same amount of money as in the person coming in. Just about everybody is at the minimum wage. Very few staff are above it. And it's caused us to lose our seasoned staff, who for the most part are our best staff. So probably not the answer you want, that we've come up with creative pieces. You know, we've gradually shrunk the residential piece. As someone unfortunately passes on or moves on, we just freeze out that slot and just keep backfilling and consolidating.
I know, Peter, I know you said that it's a complicated process for the reimbursement figures to work their way to the point where they actually are implemented by organizations like yours, service provider organizations like yours. Is there an awareness? Do they understand that if you are basing a reimbursement rate on 2007 and you're dealing with 2021 minimum wages, that it puts you in this position? I'm just sort of astonished that that's the way things work, that in service provider organizations.
In trying to be as respectful as I can, or our payers are the state of Maine, and they are not as astonished as business owners are. Or they've recently come out, they're going to do some new wage piece. Again, I'm retired, so I'm not getting all of the information current, because they're saying they don't understand the system we're in now. One of the major downsides of state government is there's a constant change. And so something that was set up 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago is ancient history to the folks that are there now. They have no idea. So, their benchmark is who closes. And I really felt badly for Suzanne's comments of thinking about closing the business, because probably that makes one of the biggest differences between maybe the nonprofit and the for-profit, in that we really can't close our business. Or, I've brought it up before I left to the board a couple times that we need to move out of residential services, and it's a mission-driven piece. And until, the last penny is spent and lost, or will be in the game, in the state of Maine, I'm sorry to say, counts on that. Well, because they look to see how many providers have failed. And every provider is like us. They're parent organizations where it's the kids of the boards that receive those services. They will do anything to hang on. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
So how many group homes were you operating like 15 years ago, and how many are you operating now? Is that an indication of the way that you've had to shift?
To a degree, I think that, one, we're a large organization. We had, when I left, it was over 700 employees. Or, we've shifted a lot into children's services. 15 years ago, we had virtually no children's services. About 300 of our employees are in children's services. Or we had about 65 group homes. Or 10 years ago, we're down to probably about 60, 58. We've closed. We don't want to disrupt anybody and put anybody out on the street. Again, it's part of our mission, and we can't. Or so as that opportunity comes up, we just gradually shrink. But there is a growing waiting list for folks for residential services. We've not taken anybody new in a long time.
Wow. Thank you. And Carrie, can you tell us what you hear from your clientele in terms of the impact of the last successive raises of minimum wage? What do you hear?
Yeah, that's a great question. it's really hard to measure the direct impact over the last 4 years. I think we're in a period of great economic growth. The unemployment rate in the state last February before the pandemic was 2.9%. So there was an extreme shortage of talent, which inevitably pushes the wages up. So I think the wages were already being pushed up to at least where the minimum wage was, if not higher. I know a lot of new businesses, when they start, often are paying above that minimum wage as their baseline, just so they don't get hit with that huge increase in compensation costs when the new laws come into effect. So I think planning and having some forethought about what the changes are, what the potential laws that are being passed is really important for businesses so they can try to plan. I think it's also important, when they say in personal finance, you should have an emergency fund. I think it's so important that businesses work as hard as possible to develop their own emergency fund to handle some of the compression challenges that the minimum wage increases will implement. And even periods of economic downturn when that emergency declaration gets established and they have to pay that additional hazard wage. So having as much planning as possible in advance is so important.
Carol, I was just gonna, is it possible for me to just comment on what Carrie and Peter
Yeah,
said?
please. Yes.
So, I sort of would reiterate what Carrie just spoke about, and that is that many small businesses were already paying higher amounts. And in my case, in 2010 my minimum wage was $7.50, and my staff would make $7 or $8 in tips. So they would be making that $14 an hour or whatever. But I also had the ability to give incentive raises at that time so that I could, if they were doing a great job, I could give them, it was a way to motivate them. But what happened recently as a result of some of these changes is what Peter was talking about. And that is older staff who were up to $12 and $14 an hour, which I had probably 2 or 3 staff out of my that had been with me for 5 or 6 years, and they were already at the $12. Well, then all of a sudden now a 14 or 15-year-old with no skills is coming in and making that amount of money. And it caused a lot of my college age students to go get a different type of a job. And if, as we continue on, I don't know if this is the time to say it, but for my business, which is really small, there's some other key points that you have to consider. And one is that it's seasonal. It's about 7 months business. Most of the employees that I hire are 15 or 16 years old. It's their first job. And the regulations for them are very onerous. Sometimes they can't work past a certain hour on a day, the number of hours per day they can't work. These are not full-time employees. Even in the summer when they say they want to work full-time, they're not working full-time. They might do it for 1 week and then they've got, I don't know, soccer camp or whatever, academic. These are not full-time workers. And so those regulations are for non-adults, basically, yet I'm being asked, and a lot of other people are being asked to pay adult wages. When the minimum wage in 2007, when the legislature looked at it, they talked about it being a single mother with a child, I think is what they said. But we don't have the youth minimum wage. So I know we're going to talk about that later, but I would say that it affected my long-term staff, the morale as well, but also just, I can't go much higher than 15. I mean, I know I can. I'm not sure with this pandemic what's going to happen in this summer.
So have you done the math? I'm just curious, if you were to take so you said that your payroll used to be about 20% of your revenue, and now it's up to closing in on 38%. If you were to pass those costs along to your customer, what would an ice cream cone cost at Beal's? Like, have you done that math?
Well, I haven't completely done the math, but I know that when Portland went to $10.68, I increased my prices by 7%. I'm constrained a little bit myself because I have a home store in Gorham. This is where I get my ice cream from, and we don't want our prices to be so different. However, Portland's minimum wage has caused me to raise my prices more than the Gorham store. Um, but in terms of how much I feel like an ice cream cone should be at this, I feel like right now it's already at, I think, 4 to 95, $5. I'm thinking $7. It's funny. I went to Starbucks the other day, and or no, not the Starbucks. Where did I go? Oh, I don't know, some fast food, and something was. Oh, I know what it was. I don't want to admit this. This is terrible, but I had a Big Mac, and it was $7.25, and I'm like, well, there you go, double cone. I honestly think that my prices, if I'm going up with the wages, is they're definitely going to rise. I'm just not exactly sure. And the sad part about it is a lot of elderly people who are on fixed incomes, their pay is not going to be right, or their pay is not going up. Their income is not going up. So I definitely think you'll see a rise in prices, and I just haven't figured out where I'm headed yet.
Okay.
Oh,
Peter,
can I comment on that? Or
yeah, yeah.
you hit two great points with that in being newly in that retired group, or when I look at the fallacy of raising minimum wage, it's everyone said, well, geez, we raised minimum wage to make it $10,000 an hour, make it whatever you want. Prices are going to rise, and the prices will go. The group of people that do not get to play in that are the people on fixed income, because the prices rise for me, but my wage doesn't go up, my income doesn't go up. What I have is what I've got. Or, and it is just a really tough part. Or, and also to Carrie's point, I think it's great to have certainly a business plan that you have reserve monies for doing that. As you get into very heavily labor intensive businesses, which is certainly what we do, working with people with intellectual disabilities, and don't wait till you swallow your water, because our payroll is about 78% of the budget.
Wow.
Wow.
A dollar raise is $1 million. So, the numbers get beyond your ability, or to say, okay, I'm going to put aside a slush fund and we cannot change our rate. So, it's a game that's being played. I think that to some degree, the state's waiting for us to see when people start going out of business, then we'll raise the rates. But anyway.
So Peter, when you and I chatted beforehand, you had said that there were a couple of retention strategies that you were embracing at John F. Murphy Homes. Can you talk a little bit about that? In the context of you're really constrained on what you can do in terms of the wages you pay, but what have you been able to do to try to encourage people to stick with you?
I guess I would break it into a couple of categories. One, the people that stay, I'd love to say it's because we have great strategies. It's because they really like the job they do, and they like the people, and they like feeling that they make a difference to somebody's life. So, we try to enhance that. We try to be very family friendly. We employed a strategy of bonuses, of not holding us into or fixing us into the future of paying monies, but when we have them, we give bonuses. And my successor has done the same thing. I think he's done a series of 2 or 3 bonuses this year to people, particularly aimed at the group of people that have been there for a long time, or to try to keep them there. The nature of the job is a great job, except for the pay. Because people work in small settings, they have a lot of independence. We try to give the staff a lot of say in how they do their job. They have to obviously follow rules and constraints, but within that, there's that opportunity to go do things. And that to some degree is the killer for us, because I think that the state and most people look at it as adult daycare, but the requirements are a whole lot different than just a daycare. But it's not quite the same pressure of producing widgets, and we try to maintain and build that piece of the job that at the end of the day, you can go home with a smile on your face.
And what have you been doing around benefits? I think you mentioned that, well, go
Well,
ahead.
Yeah, no, we've held the line on health insurance. I mean, we've always offered health insurance, before it was before it was required, or if you will, under Obamacare. And we pay just about 100% of the health insurance. It becomes a game. I mean, we could tell people they're going to pay 10 or 15 or 20% of their insurance and, raise their salary. We've not done that. We've held on to try to pay, I don't know, we're 95% plus that we're paying on the health insurance for the individual.
Good. That's
And,
good.
we're large enough that we're able to do the cafeteria kinds of plans, the pre-tax plans, those kinds of pre-tax savings that we push to staff. And really happy to say that within the place we've done, we don't have a retirement system per se, but now that I'm gone, we've instituted our first time match to our own 403B plans that we have for individuals. So we do those kinds of things to try and encourage people to stay, but it's nickels and dimes that we get to work with when you take it across 700 people. So if, everyone got a couple $100 into their retirement system this year, it's much more saying, look, we're trying, than you're going to get rich doing it.
Thanks. And yeah, so Sue, why don't you talk about what you were doing to try to mitigate the impact of the increasing payroll?
Sure. Well, of course, since I'm a mom and pop, first thing I've done is I've been working more myself. So one of the common business definitions of a small business is 25 employees or 50 employees or 100. And I really think the definition of what is actually a small business ought to change, because the McDonald's, those are a part of a franchise. Their volume, their purchasing power, because of their volume, is great. So therefore they can get their milk a lot cheaper than I can get my, that sort of thing. So one of the things, besides working more myself and becoming a little bit more efficient, I've increased technology so that I can decrease my own workload, which means I've had to purchase things. So it's kind of, I have to weigh expenses versus benefits. But one of the things is I now have a scheduling app, and there's been less hours for my staff, because when I have when I have to work more, I'm cutting off staff hours so that my profit margin can go up a little bit, increasing prices we already talked about. I also have been demanding more of my staff. I have a 14 to 18-year-old group, but if they're going to be there by themselves and there's only going to be 4 customers from 11 a.m. till 12, they've got to be doing something even more than what they normally would be doing. And so therefore I'm actually giving them, this is a strategy for me, giving them more work and letting them. Now, normally you would say, oh, well, that's great, you can do that. But these are not adults. And the problem is that kind of adding more demands takes a level of maturity. So I also have to balance that. I talked about, I haven't done this yet, but I talked about doing, adding solar panels to my building, but I don't own the building. My second highest cost besides payroll is energy costs because of refrigeration. And I've already had Efficiency Maine out. They've given me estimates and everything, but I can't legally raise, because it's grandfathered and I'm in a residential area. I cannot legally raise the sign. So I would have to go get a variance or something. And I could do that, but again, it's not my building. So do I invest that kind of money when I'm, unless I have a long-term lease? But also I was thinking Grubhub or 2 Dine In might help me. And that sort of was a pandemic thing where I was like, oh, well, maybe I should do that. But then I also have to have one person, I may have to staff that higher. So I have to kind of balance. Those are kind of some of the strategies. I definitely less staff. I used to employ, say, 24. Now I'm down staff. So I've raised prices, work more, less hours. But I'm trying to figure it out. And for the most part, because I'm a good boss, people do want to stay, or if they go, I tell them to go and they want to come back sometimes. So that's good. um, I think that's about it.
So yeah, I think our audience can identify with many of the things that Sue and Peter have said in terms of trying to figure it out. So Carrie, what advice do you have for, for settling on a compensation strategy that's realistic for folks?
Absolutely. I wanted to follow up on Sue's comment about her younger staff and trying to keep them motivated to take on more responsibilities. And I think one of the best things you can consider and maybe try is to create a competition for your staff, whether you can come up with some kind of profitability metric, or if there's less waste, if they have to throw out ice cream because they dropped it, or if you have something that you can measure and create a competition on and then incentivize. So maybe give them an extra $20 a shift for whoever has the most sales, or produces the least amount of waste. There's lots of creative things that you can do, like small dollar amounts, create a competition to increase productivity of your staff, and those added responsibilities, you can encourage that through some of those little creative contests that you can implement. And I think just overall thinking about who your employee population is really important. There are 5 generations in the workforce right now, and the needs of each of those generations is very different. So going back to Peter's comment about keeping health insurance and keeping that up to 100% employer paid, maybe that's not as important for your younger staff, or maybe it is important for them too. But I think talking to your employees, surveying them, and understanding what they want out of the job in terms of their overall compensation and benefit mix is another important way to see if there's areas that can be adjusted or cut in order for you to compensate for the increase in the minimum wage. So there's lots of different strategies. And I think also there's a culture shift and a mindset shift that people need to look at your employees as an investment instead of just a pure expense, because without your employees, you don't have a usable product or service. It would be, for example, Sue working 50 hours a week trying to serve all the customers on her own. She needs her staff, and she needs the staff to make the business profitable. So figuring out how to motivate your particular group of employees and considering them an investment and figuring out what is important to them will help you figure out your overall compensation strategy and mix, and hopefully allow you to manage those increasing compensation costs every year.
So, as far as motivating, I mean, the one problem with my particular job is it's a starter job, and there isn't any room there's no going up. Money is the way you go up. You get raises, and at a minimum wage of 15, or now in Portland it's 18, I have no room to go up. Any going up is $1 off my bottom line, and believe me, I don't make a lot of money. And so my biggest concern is that I agree with you, Carrie, in terms of providing incentives and providing motivation, and making it a great place to work, and giving my staff some freedom to learn and those kinds of things. I consider myself a teacher, actually. That's exactly what I consider myself, because that's what I am doing. They walk in and I teach them how to change a toilet paper roll. Sometimes they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to sweep. Seriously, they don't know how to add or give change. There's a whole bunch of just how to be there on time, how to call in when you're sick, and who to call in, and what would be the next step. All of these are teaching moments, and if I'm patient and if I'm kind and compassionate, and which I am, I think my staff really likes me. These are the way I keep them. Just like Peter, his mission is, people want to be there because of the mission. This is not a place. But so for me, retaining staff is difficult. And I will say that it was difficult to hire the older staff in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years than it was before. I could get a lot of college students. I'm not getting, they're going on internships and they're making more now too. So it's really, I don't know, it's difficult. So, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Carrie, but I'm just sort of telling you from my standpoint as an employer of first-time job applicants, it's a little bit different than even college age. The difference between a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old is considerable.
So I was just going to comment on something Carrie said at our last Making It Work webinar. One of our panelists is Andrew Vogt, who is the co-owner of the Alpine and Hunt Club in Portland. And he had raised his minimum wage to $15 an hour before there were any mandates to do that. And I was a little bit surprised because he had just said like revenues were down roughly 50% from the previous year. And so I was like, well, how are you financing an increase like that across the board to your employees when revenues are so constrained? And he said there were two things. And one was he added a surcharge, a pandemic surcharge, but that was, and was dedicating that money to payroll and benefits. But the other big thing was he wasn't taking a salary. That was the way. And he said it's a gamble. He's hoping that by doing so, he will keep a trained and engaged workforce. So when things return to normal, he'll be in a position to try to really increase revenues. But he acknowledges, you have to be in a position where you don't need to pull down salary, which I think is, very specific to people's circumstances. And secondly, that once the pandemic is over, things will return to normal and there will be this pent up demand for going out to eat and having specialty cocktails and a resurgence of people with disposable income. So, I mean, and I think that he's not alone in terms of trying to figure out the risks here and how to deal with payroll in a circumstance where the context is changing all the time. So let me go to the next question that I had sent to you folks, and that is, what surprised you most about complying with the increasing minimum wage? I imagine that you prepared for it as best you could. I mean, I guess on the upside, you knew it was coming. You knew that there were going to be 4 years of increases until 2020. So I'm just curious, what surprised you the most? And let me throw that one to Peter first.
Yeah, we definitely had tracked it over, we were doing 4-year budgets to know where it was going to come. I probably, well, not what surprised us of internals of the minimum wage increase. We expected goods and service prices to go up a lot faster than they have. So, there's a lag, everyone's talking about raising their prices, and I don't know whether the pandemic sort of dampened that, but I would have expected, and I forecasted that, a much higher increase in basic goods and services, whether it's milk or groceries or anything, going to McDonald's, going wherever. And there have been increases, certainly, but not anywhere near as wild as they probably need to be to connect up with it. And, or not to soapbox it, but to some degree, people need to see that you can keep raising minimum wage forever. Prices will raise and everyone's going to end up in the same place. And, that lag time period sort of gives a lull that, there isn't going to be an increased inflation. I would have thought there'd have been a much bigger bump in inflation by now.
If you're already in kind of a precarious situation with respect to recruiting and retaining a workforce, and you would have seen, and if you had seen the kinds of increases you were projecting on the expense side of the equation, where would you have been? Where would that put you now, Peter?
Again, you got to keep in mind that payroll is almost 80% of the budget, so those routine expenses are not the make or break in a budget. I just was surprised that that trickle down from what it cost Suzanne to produce an ice cream cone that there's a lag between that and what the ice cream cone is really needs to cost. Well, I thought there would have been a quicker connection to that.
Okay. And Sue, what surprised you?
When I thought about this, I said, well, nothing really, because I because I really was prepared for it, and then I saw it coming, and because normally I pay my staff really well, they get great tips. It surprised me that the tips kept coming as
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so that's kind of interesting, and that made me work on. I tried the tip. I tried using the tip credit, which I could use. It was another strategy that I tried for a couple of years, but because of the nature of my staff coming in and out every hour, half hour, depending on whether it's raining or if it's 80 degrees and sunny, I got to have more people coming in, and keeping track of those tips is a nightmare. And there are there is no software that keeps track of pooled tips. At least, well, my software company is actually working on it right now, and we're having discussions about that. But I did it all by hand. I kept track of it by hand, but now I'm taking credit cards and I have to do that by hand as well, because it's not the same as a pooled tip at, say, a restaurant where they split it amongst an 8-hour day workers. I'm splitting it every 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, back to 2 hours again, 1 hour. Somebody's only there from, say, 7 to 8. And there's reasons that I have to put my staff in there at that, and that has to do with the volume and when they come. And so I guess that was surprising to me. Anyway, I stopped using the tip credit last year, and I raised everybody's up to $12 an hour because it was such a pain for me. It was a lot of work. And I don't know if that's going to come back this year because of the increase or not. It might.
Right. The tips return.
Yeah. But the other
Yeah.
thing that surprised me, I guess, and this is a little bit different than what your question is, but what surprised me as all of this was discussed at the legislature, I spent 3 days up there during testifying, and nobody was looking at the details. Nobody was listening to what a small business that has, revenues under 200,000 compared to a quote unquote small business that makes a million to, which they might both only have 25 employees, but nobody was looking at the details, and it was the one size fits all. There's, very little legislation fits one size, works with one size fits all. Unfortunately, we would like to simplify it. There's a lot of simplification, but when it comes to businesses and stuff, there's just so much variability about what, they've exempted from the minimum wage camp workers, like, Camp Ketcha is across the street from me, and also the potato workers, because it's seasonal. Well, I'm a seasonal business as well. As a matter of fact, so many businesses in Maine are seasonal. So my question is, they've exempted the potato workers who probably actually need the money more. They're migrants who are raising families. So I think nobody looked at those kind of details. And that surprised me. I would expect that my legislators would work as hard as I did trying to get the information.
Okay. Oh, Carrie, what did you hear? What from your clients? What surprised them?
I think the biggest surprise for people has been really just understanding how it impacts their employees more so than them. So raising the minimum wage is good for the employee, even if it's hard on the employer. And hopefully the goal of that is to increase productivity. If they feel they're well compensated or better compensated, they should have less financial stress, and that means they can focus more on the task at hand. And obviously this is going to be vastly different depending on your industry. I keep listening to Sue, and I want to give her a call offline and just talk for hours about things.
Me too. Yeah.
because she's just in such a unique situation. And I think other businesses as well, with a seasonal business, a younger staff, it's a completely different set of resources and thought that you have to put into what you do for your employees and how to manage the costs, especially, for Peter's business, he's thinking about long-term retention, or for most businesses, they hire employees after high school or graduation from college, whatever those specific requirements are. And then they work to retain that set of employees, where you have a lot of turnover every single year, and that's expected as people move on to the next step in their life. It's so different. And the answers and the observations from clients are so individualized based on what their actual situation is. I think it's so specific that having one general observation is just impossible. And I think having a good, whether it's a business advisor that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, or if you're working with a consultant, or if you have a friend who's doing something similar, I think that is probably the best thing that you can do. I've heard from a lot of clients that they have business managers that they work with to help them through some of these challenges, or they have a bunch of friends that own other businesses. They join these business associations and they can all share their challenges and different things that they've done to figure out how to move forward. I think that's a really great idea. Find people with like challenges and work together to find a solution.
I think that's really good advice. Peter, let me ask you. So Sue, I think in the answering the what surprised her, she also touched on what regulatory change she'd like to see. And clearly it's the one size fits all. The one size fits all nature of some of the regulations that have been adopted. I'm curious, what one regulatory change would you like to see that would make a difference for John F. Murphy Homes?
But not just for John F. Murphy Homes, I think it would make a difference for most businesses, is a financial impact statement on every rule and law change. There's an impact statement required if it affects the municipality,
Right,
or state government, but it does not give you any sense of what impact it has on a business. And I think that, the comment about your legislators not hearing it had nothing to do with your size. My legislators didn't hear the issue from a $50 million corporation either. So, it needs that impact. And we have brought that issue up, we being, other agencies like John F. Murphy Homes over the years, and there's just been a refusal on the part of the legislature to even think about doing something like that. But if there was an impact that said, okay, we're going to do X, and this is going to be what happens to the businesses, what happens to your prices, what happens to, a real impact statement, I think it would go a long way to making people think twice, or before they do some of the, what I would call do-gooder legislation. Everyone's heart's in the right place, but they're not thinking about what is the ramification of it, and what does it really do.
That's what I was saying too. The devil is in the details.
The details.
Yeah.
The details. Yep.
Well, so we've gone a little bit over in our discussion. So I want to use the last 10 minutes or so to get questions from the audience. Strawberry, do you want to tee up one of the questions for us?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions in here. Question from Ray. Another problem facing nonprofits is the fact that a person can go on unemployment and receive $400 a week from Maine and another $400 from the federal government. Is there something being done to address the minimum wage and shortage of personnel?
Well, I will say that was a problem for me. 2 of my staff turned me down. Talk about retaining staff. Everybody, I heard on the news so many times, and I'm a Democrat, but I heard it a lot from the Dems, that it's absolutely not true that people are staying home for unemployment. Well, it was absolutely true. My nephew was doing it, and 2 of my staff members, but only one of the 2 actually admitted to me that, Sue, I really would like to come to work, but I'm making more money on unemployment. So it was a problem. That's all I say. I don't know how to solve that problem, but again, devil's in the detail, right, Peter?
Oh, it
Um,
is. I mean, we had the same thing. We had one unit in the children's services that had to close for a while, and we had to lay off some staff, and they just wound it to the other staff that were employed that they got a much better deal because they were making more money and staying home while the other staff were being exposed and working. It was very, very difficult.
Was that a temporary situation because of the bump that was passed under the CARES Act? Did it resolve itself, or are you still dealing with that?
No, well, we brought everybody back. We were closed for a month on one piece, and by the end of the summer, we had slowly reopened that unit. It was a special purpose school, and bringing the teachers' aides back. But staff were begging to be laid off because they'd make more money or laid off. I mean,
they just, instead of looking at, Carol, instead of looking at whether somebody was a 40-hour a week employee and whether they were seasonal, those employment benefits from the CARES Act and the other went to all unemployed people. And I think that's because they wanted to get it out fast. I mean, again, heart's in the right place for sure. And a lot of people did need the help. And so but I will say that for my younger staff, again, it's just, it created a problem for me.
well, there was no look at what the total salary that someone was earning.
Exactly.
So you could end up literally making more money. So, the intention wasn't that it would keep you from staying home, but people are people. I mean, if you get paid more money to do nothing than you get paid to work, what are you going to choose to do? I know what I would choose to do.
Right.
And I think that Greg Dougal just noted in the Q&A box that there's I believe it's a smaller amount, but there's still another bump that is part of the COVID relief package that's being debated now in Washington, another bump for unemployment that would augment what the states are paying. Let's take another question.
Sure. A question from Jennifer. How about a different minimum wage for youth?
For youth, so that's a training wage, right? I think that Sue touched on that in her comments, but I am curious, and actually, Carrie, I'm going to ask you that question first because I think you've got that broad context. So, what do you think? And as a compensation specialist, what's the thinking around a training wage or a youth wage?
That's a really interesting thing that I haven't done a ton of research on, but the current FLSA guidelines are the training wage has to be applied, and this is the federal standard. So Maine is a little bit different, and there's been different talk of other structures, but that training wage can be paid for 90 consecutive days, and then it needs to jump up to the minimum wage. I think overall, in terms of compensation philosophy, you need to think about what are those younger employees doing. Obviously, there's going to be a difference in responsibility and input for a new hire of any age, but especially a new hire with less experience and somebody who's been there for a few years. So you have to think, are they doing the same job? How do you keep internal equity? A lot of the legislature, a lot of the laws that the pay equity is a really big focus. And especially, I think, with some of the changing overall culture in the country, there's a huge focus on overall pay equity. So are those younger employees doing less for the business than somebody 2 years older than them potentially? Like, where is that limit? Is it 18? Is it 20? Because I think the FLSA is up to 20. 20-year-olds are often completely independent of their parents, especially if they're not in college. So what you have to determine if it makes sense to pay them differently.
So Carol, I'm sure I have a lot to say about this one. I didn't get a chance to say what the one regulatory thing, and that is, I think we should have a youth minimum wage or a training wage. And when we talk about the pay equity that Carrie just mentioned, are they doing the same job? I think, again, you have to look at the details of it. Are they all scooping ice cream? Yes, they are. But however, Well, one time I hired a 30-year-old woman. It took me one day to train her. And the next day she was opening and closing the store, completing the register and doing all of these things. I trained her in one day. A 15 or 16-year-old takes me 2 months, 3 months to even get them, up to the point where they want. So the last time I looked, 23 states, and it could be different now, 23 states had a youth minimum wage. And I think the one that I liked the best, I want to say it's Pennsylvania, but don't quote me. They actually made a difference between the 14 and 15-year-olds and the 16 and 17. In fact, they had raises just like they had the minimum wage with the CPI, or to grow the minimum wage. They had the same thing with kids. 15-year-olds had one wage, 16-year-olds had another minimum wage, 17, 18. These kids are dependent on their parents, and their parents are getting tax deductions for them. They aren't buying their own toothpaste or the rolls unless they're emancipated, in which case, or if they have the kids of their own. And I understand that. I am compassionate too. But in general, a training wage for 90 days would be very, very helpful for a business like mine, but also would a youth minimum wage. And I think it's actually very equitable. They're not doing the same job. Maybe the job description is the same, but they actually don't do it on a daily basis. I mean, that's the thing that's really hard. I don't fire somebody after 2 times telling them how to sweep the floor. If it was an adult, I probably would. With kids, it's teaching. We're
Right.
teaching them. And so you were developing them. And like I said, the difference between a 16-year-old to what Carrie mentioned as a 20 is unbelievable. That's why we have, they can't drive till they're 16. They can't vote till they're 18. There are reasons why we have, so we have an adult wage, but yet they're not allowed to work past 7 p.m. or 7 o'clock in the morning or on a school night, even on a Friday. Those are laws that I have to work around, and yet I have to pay them the adult wage. So yes, that would be a great thing, the youth minimum wage.
And what do you think, Peter? Would that make a difference in your organization?
Yeah, I doubt it would make a difference to us. It would depend on the details because we are not by regulation allowed to hire anybody under the age of 18.
Okay.
So, but I think in general, it's, I worry about how many kids aren't going to get a job in the summertime. Well, most of us all had summer jobs, and that's how we got to college, how we got to do half the things we did, or, so, I know everything that Suzanne says, even though I don't deal with kids at that age, to hire them, I think of my own kids and myself, and, man, I don't think many employees would have hired us and paid us that kind of money.
Yeah. We have, I think, time for one more question. So Strawberry, I know we have 3 remaining, now 4. Could you pick one more? And perhaps if we don't get to your question, we will try to ask our panelists their answers and post them on our landing page. We record all of our Making It Work webinars, and you can find them on the Press Herald website after the fact. So if we don't get to your question now, we'll try to get to it after the fact. So Strawberry, can you tee up the last question, please?
Sure, we've got a question from Ethan. What responsibility do businesses have to pay workers a wage they can live on?
So that's the question of living wage versus minimum wage, which I think is, Carrie, why don't you start with that one?
So this is something that I was recently talking to somebody about, and it was determining what a livable wage is. That's going to mean something different for everyone based on what they're used to in terms of their expenses, but also where they live. If you look at the cost of living in the greater Portland area, it's not cheap. We think about what the price of an apartment is, what the price of groceries are, or if you want to buy a house. There's a couple different sources online, Wallet Hub, and there's another one. So USA Today, they both posted some overall tax burden statistics, and they're slightly different. Wallet Hub said Maine has the 4th highest overall tax burden in the country versus USA Today, which says it has the 5th highest. So thinking about the actual expenses that your employees have and using that to think about what that livable wage is. And as Sue was saying, the student workers who are generally being supported by their parents, what's their livable wage? But on the other hand, they do have higher cost of living in terms of buying a car, and then the cost of college, which is only going up exponentially every year. So there's a lot of different factors that relate to determining what that livable wage is. And it is, I think, the responsibility of the business owners to put some thought into that when they go and they develop the starting wage. If they determine that they're paying above the minimum wage, that's their prerogative as a business owner. Maybe they opt to take lower pay to pay their employees higher. They're the ones with the more potential for future reward if the business does well. So they also have that ability to take on more risk in general. So a very complex question, but I do think businesses need to have kind of all considerations in place when they're determining what they're paying their employees. And the cost of living is a huge one, but also to add on to that, the cost of labor. So if you look at what people are accepting as a minimum wage for any given position, that's regardless of what the cost of living is, it's probably what you're going to have to pay if you cannot bring people on for a different wage. So a couple of different things to consider.
Right. So it's competition within the market as well as the regulatory things that you need to think about.
Right.
Peter and Sue, very quickly, living wage versus minimum wage.
I'm a marketplace kind of person. I mean, I think the marketplace is much better to handle it than as soon as you begin to set a regulation, a standard, you get into all the things we've been talking about of the details and one size fitting all, because it's impossible to create a regulation or an expectation from the government that makes that isn't anything other than one size fits all. It's it's too big of a task. I'm not sure anyone could do that. And the marketplace really responds well.
And you get the last word, Sue.
Okay. And thank you, Peter, for saying one size fits all. I think, we are not Boston and we're not New York either. The volume for retail establishments, at least, is much less there than here. And there's a fallacy that says that we business owners are not trying to be responsible by complaining about the minimum wage or whatever, because I think most of the business owners, I really want to retain employees and they want to pay them a living wage. However, solving the college expense, as an example, solving the college expense problem with legislation about pay isn't the way to go about it. Go to the college expenses and figure out why they're charging so much when they have huge endowments. So again, Peter says go with the market. I say just think about the details.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. It was a really lively and engaging conversation. I appreciate it. If we were doing this in the Portland Public Library, which is where we had been hosting our breakfast forums, there would be thunderous applause right now, thanking you for sharing your insights and your expertise. Exactly. And to the audience, please do submit your questions after the fact. We'll try to get them answered and posted on our website. And also, please look for more Making It Work segments coming up in 2021. And to our sponsors, to our panelists, to the audience, thank you all very much for joining us today. And I hope we see you next month. Thank you.